mana ya?
Kepada Bapak Ibu hadirin tamu undangan untuk dapat menempati tempat yang telah disediakan. Apabila Bapak Ibu membaca nama-nama provinsi yang ada di atas meja, itu hanya mempresentasikan bahwa tersebut adalah presentasi dari nama-nama ibu kota atau provinsi yang ada di Indonesia, sehingga Bapak Ibu dapat menempati tempat sesuai dengan keinginan Bapak Ibu. Sekali lagi kami mohon dengan hormat untuk dapat mengisi bangku kosong di depan terlebih dahulu. Terima kasih.
Udah ya, linknya ke publikasi ya.
Terima kasih kalau
Boleh. Enggak, jangan di depan. Ada di depan. Direktur. Apa
Hal ini juga dilengkapi dengan telepon satelit untuk keadaan darurat. We are now in the Inequality SMERU. In case of emergency or if you hear an alarm, you don't need to be panicked. Sekarang kita berada di titik undian payah. Apabila terjadi keadaan darurat atau alarm, Anda tidak perlu panik. If you hear this announcement on the loudspeaker, your attention please. There is an emergency in the hotel. Please leave the building quietly through the nearest emergency door.
safety briefing.
Our officer will direct you through the nearest exit to the assembly point. Apabila ada abang-abang melalui pengeras suara, mohon perhatian menjadi keadaan darurat di kota.
Kita mencapai sasaran bola nasional diperlukan
Petugas kami akan mengarahkan Anda menuju pintu keluar terdekat menuju assembly point. Should you need medical assistance, our clinic is open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. The Empire Beach Resort Bali juga dilengkapi dengan klinik.
Flyernya.
The nearest police station to the Empire Beach Resort Bali is Kuta Police Station. The nearest hospital is the IMC Hospital.
siapa?
Gue, bentar ya.
Kantor polisi terdekat di Empire Beach Resort Bali adalah Polsek Kuta dan rumah sakit terdekat adalah di IMC Hospital. Thank you for your attention and have a good day. Terima kasih atas kepercayaan Anda dan selamat beraktivitas.
Untuk di sini maksudnya.
Bapak Ibu hadirin tamu undangan, kami informasikan demi keefektifan sesi panel kita, maka Bapak Ibu dapat mengajukan pertanyaan melalui aplikasi Slido. Dan untuk tata panduan atau tata caranya Bapak Ibu bisa lihat di layar depan Bapak Ibu. Sekali lagi kami informasikan kepada Bapak Ibu hadirin tamu undangan untuk mengajukan pertanyaan ataupun pendapat, Bapak Ibu dapat mengajukan melalui aplikasi Slido dengan tata cara atau panduan yang dapat dilihat oleh Bapak Ibu di layar besar di depan Bapak Ibu. Terima kasih.
Sekali lagi kami ucapkan selamat pagi dan selamat datang kepada Bapak Ibu para tamu undangan di The Empire Beach Hotel Resort Bali. Kami mempersilahkan Bapak Ibu untuk memilih tempat duduk sesuai dengan keinginan Bapak Ibu. Jika Bapak Ibu melihat ada nama provinsi atau ibu kota yang ada di atas meja, kami bermaksud untuk menamai setiap meja yang akan Bapak Ibu tempati. Jadi Bapak Ibu bisa menempati tempat duduk sesuai dengan keinginan atau preferensi dari Bapak Ibu sekalian. Terima kasih. Bapak Ibu tamu undangan, kami mempersilahkan Bapak Ibu untuk dapat mengambil snack yang kami telah sediakan di depan ruangan. Bapak Ibu juga dapat membawanya masuk ke dalam ruangan untuk sambil dinikmati sambil menunggu acara ini dimulai. Terima kasih.
Ya, 4, ada 4. Tambahin jadi semua 10.
Nggak apa-apa lah, nanti bisa sharing. Ya, ya, ya. Bisa. Tahu peran pada yang lain. Sekarang siapa yang pegang? Tadi kan salah satu ini kan sisi keuangannya substansi developmentnya mereka kan perlu yang menguasai substansi development tapi bisa keuangan nah itu belum ada gitu.
Nggak boleh lagi. Sekolah apa kuliah?
Buyers like Iskak now have to travel further afield. Seaweed farmer Hassan Basri Hiremba finds it hard to believe that the buyer has come to them.
I dreamed that one day the buyer would come, and thank God it has happened. I feel very proud because before it was just in my imagination that I would meet the buyer.
One reason for Basri's surprise is that just 3 years ago, the people in this village knew nothing at all about seaweed. They were fishermen and relied on irregular seasonal catches to survive. Then a government project, supported by the UN's International Fund for Agricultural Development, or IFAD, worked with the community to help them identify their problems and come up with their own solutions. From the success of neighboring communities, they knew that seaweed was the answer. They elected Abdul Khalid Gola to be trained in all aspects of seaweed production, and his job is to pass on this knowledge to the rest of the group. The change in their lives has been significant.
Before I didn't have enough income for my children to go to school, but with seaweed, our children can go to university.
Unlike when they relied on fishing, the seaweed farmers now have earnings throughout the year, and both Gola and Basri have almost quadrupled their
Enggak, lancar. Bagus ini.
Harus deket kali ya. Taruh di bawah ya. Di sini kali, Bu. Di sini kali, Bu.
Mundur.
Aspect this does not benefit while over the last 30 years. This is just a statistic. The reality is that the percentage of employees
Honorable distinguished guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen, we cordially invite you to be seated at the prescribed chair in the room.
Tempat yang telah disediakan, karena sesaat lagi acara akan segera dimulai. Kami mohon kepada Bapak Ibu untuk dapat menempati bangku di depan terlebih dahulu. Sekali lagi, kami mohon dengan hormat kepada Bapak Ibu hadirin tamu undangan untuk dapat menempati tempat yang telah disediakan karena sesaat lagi acara akan segera dimulai. Terima kasih.
Sekali lagi kami informasikan bahwa Bapak Ibu dapat menempati tempat duduk sesuai dengan keinginan Bapak Ibu. Jika Bapak Ibu menemukan ada nama provinsi atau ibu kota di atas meja, itu dimaksudkan untuk menamai meja yang akan Bapak Ibu tempati. Untuk itu terserah Bapak Ibu bisa menempati meja atau kursi manapun sesuai dengan keinginan Bapak Ibu.
supports projects to empower small movements through loan and grant programs, policy engagement, and pro-poor partnerships.
We would like to warmly welcome the Minister of National Development Planning, Head of Bappenas, the President of IFAN, Governor of Bali, and also all the speakers and moderator of this event.
We're struggling to face rural urban immigration, land and water degradation, and economic and institutional constraints.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we start our agenda, we would like to present a traditional dance from Bali called Tari Legong. This dance will be performed by Sanggar Aswini Kembar.
Tari Legong is a traditional dance that accentuates its movement and gamelan that follows. Tari Legong is rich of its religious and historical values and embodies grace to the Balinese ancestor, who has inherited values and culture.
Please welcome Tari Legong by Sanggar Aswini Kembar.
We would like to invite all of you to sing the national anthem of the Republic of Indonesia, Indonesia Raya. May we all arise, please. be seated.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, we would like to welcome the Excellency Minister of National Development Planning, Head of Bappenas, Bapak Bambang Brojonegoro, the Excellency President of International Fund for Agriculture Development or IFAD, Mr. Gilbert Hombo, the Honorable Representatives of World Foundation, the Honorable Governor of Bali, Bapak Wayan Koster,
The Honorable, all the speakers and moderators, the representatives of line ministries or institutions, Regional Development Planning Agency, BAPEDA, development partners, research institutions, the representatives of embassies and officials from countries around the world, representatives of universities, media partners, all distinguished guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen.
we would like to welcome all of you at International Conference on Inclusive Economic Growth, Reducing Poverty and Equality as a part of the 2018 IMF World Bank Group Annual Meetings, which is held on Wednesday, 10 October 2018.
First of all, let us pray and praise to Allah, the Almighty, because of His bless and mercy, we can gather in this beautiful venue without any obstacle and in a good condition. Our event today is organized by the Ministry of National Development Planning, Bappenas, and the SMERU Research Institute in collaboration with Ford Foundation and International Fund for Agricultural Development. This event is also supported by Asian Development Bank and the Ministry of Home Affairs.
Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed with our first agenda, let us inform you our event agenda today, namely, welcoming remarks from the Governor of Bali, welcoming remarks from the President of IFAD, keynote speech from the Minister of National Development Planning, Head of Bappenas, which will be followed by the opening procession of our conference today, panel discussion session 1.
Then continued with lunch break, panel discussion session 2, panel discussion session 3, closing remarks from Deputy Minister for Economic Affairs, Bappenas. To end the day, we will have gala dinner and cultural performances in the evening as the closing of our program.
Well, Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, now we are coming to the first agenda, the welcoming remarks from the Governor of Bali. We cordially invite Bapak Wayan Koster to come to the stage.
Om Swastiastu. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera. Salam Namo Buddhaya Rahayu. Yang terhormat Bapak Menteri Perencanaan Pembangunan Nasional Republik Indonesia, Yang Mulia Presiden International Fund for Agriculture Development, yang saya hormati para pembicara, para undangan, dan peserta pertemuan yang berbahagia. Marilah kita mengucapkan puja dan puji syukur kehadapan Yang Widiwasa, Tuhan Yang Maha Esa, karena atas perkenannya kita bersama-sama dapat hadir pada pertemuan sangat penting pagi hari ini dalam keadaan sehat dan berbahagia. Saya menyampaikan selamat datang di Pulau Bali, Pulau Dewata yang kita cintai bersama, kepada para peserta pertemuan yang datang dari seluruh penjuru dunia. Merupakan suatu kehormatan dan kepercayaan bagi pemerintah daerah dan masyarakat Bali karena telah ditunjuk sebagai tempat pertemuan yang pertama dan terbesar di dunia, yaitu Annual Meeting IMF World Bank tahun 2018 yang dihadiri oleh lebih dari 35.000 peserta dari 189 negara. Bali merupakan pulau kecil dengan luas wilayah 5.636,66 km persegi, terdiri dari 9 kabupaten kota, 57 kecamatan, 716 desa kelurahan dan 1.493 desa adat dengan jumlah penduduk 4,2 juta jiwa. Bali memiliki lebih dari 5.000 pura sehingga dikenal sebagai Pulau Seribu Pura. Karakteristik yang lain, Bali dikenal sebagai pulau yang unik karena memiliki alam, manusia, dan budaya yang menyatu dalam satu kesatuan tatanan kehidupan yang terus hidup di tengah-tengah masyarakat dalam dinamika perubahan global. Alam Bali merupakan alam yang sangat indah, berisi pantai, laut, danau, sungai, dan gunung, serta pegunungan. Gunung di hulu dan pantai di hilir, sehingga terjadi bentangan alam nyagar gunung, di mana pegunungan tersebut terbentang di tengah-tengah Pulau Bali yang memanjang dari barat ke timur. Bali didiami oleh masyarakat yang memiliki tata kehidupan dengan kebudayaan dan spiritualitas yang tinggi. Tata kehidupan manusia Bali dengan kebudayaan tinggi tersebut diwadahi dalam desa adat yang menjadi wadah menyatunya simbol-simbol dan nilai-nilai yang bersumber dari adat istiadat, agama, tradisi, seni dan budaya, serta kearifan lokal dalam melaksanakan tata kehidupan sehari-harinya, sehingga terwujud menjadi suatu alam kehidupan selain khas unik, indah, menarik, juga menjadi alam kehidupan yang suci, agung, dan metaksu. Para leluhur tetua Bali memberikan wejangan cara hidup manusia Bali yang menyatu dengan alam, yaitu perlunya menjaga kelestarian lingkungan hidup untuk menjaga kelangsungan kehidupan. Manusia adalah alam itu sendiri. Manusia harus sejalan atau seirama dengan alam. Hidup yang menghidupi, urip yang menguripi. Hidup harus menghormati alam. Alam ibarat orang tua. Oleh karena itu hidup harus mengasihi alam. Tata cara kehidupan yang menyatu dengan alam tersebut tertuang dalam nilai-nilai filosofi Trihita Karana, yaitu cara hidup untuk memelihara 3 keseimbangan. Yaitu pertama, keseimbangan antara manusia dengan Yang Maha Pencipta. Kedua, keseimbangan antara manusia dengan sesama manusia. Dan ketiga, keseimbangan antara manusia dengan alam beserta lingkungannya. Kebudayaan dan tata kehidupan masyarakat Bali di seluruh desa adat Bali diatur dengan awe-gawe atau hukum adat, sehingga masyarakat Bali hidup dalam suatu ikatan masyarakat komunal sebagai satuan kelompok masyarakat yang guyup, memiliki semangat gotong royong yang terikat oleh parahyangan, pawongan, dan pelemahan di desa adat. Itulah sebabnya Bali disebut pulau yang kecil namun indah. Small is beautiful. Oleh karena itu, ke depan pembangunan Bali akan fokus dengan memprioritaskan konservasi alam, manusia, dan budaya Bali sesuai dengan visi kami sebagai Gubernur Bali, yaitu Langun Satkerti Loke Bali, yang artinya menjaga kesucian dan keharmonisan alam Bali beserta isinya untuk mewujudkan kehidupan masyarakat Bali yang sejahtera dan bahagia secara sakala dan niskala, yang dilaksanakan dengan pendekatan pembangunan dalam satu kesatuan wilayah, yaitu satu pulau, satu pola, dan satu tata kelola, one element, one management, and one komando dalam pola pembangunan semesta berencana yang digagas oleh Bapak Presiden Republik Indonesia yang pertama, yaitu Insinyur Soekarno. Sehingga Bali akan menjadi pulau yang masyarakatnya selalu bersemangat melestarikan adat, agama, tradisi, seni, dan budaya, serta kearifan lokal, menjadi pulau yang suci, agung, dan metaksu, dan sekaligus menjadi masyarakat modern di dunia dalam menghadapi dinamika arus perubahan global. Vibrasi kesucian dan keindahan alam Bali serta keramah tamahan masyarakatnya akan memberikan kekuatan dan inspirasi bagi seluruh peserta, sehingga saya yakin pertemuan ini akan berlangsung dengan baik, lancar, dan sukses. Kita semua berharap banyak pertemuan ini akan menghasilkan berbagai rumusan mengenai hal-hal terbaik bagi kemajuan perekonomian dunia, khususnya dalam mewujudkan pertumbuhan ekonomi yang inklusif menuju kesejahteraan masyarakat dunia yang berkeadilan. Bapak Menteri yang terhormat dan hadirin yang saya hormati, dari penyelenggaraan pertemuan ini, Bali memperoleh banyak manfaat langsung maupun tidak langsung, dalam jangka pendek maupun jangka panjang, terhadap peningkatan pembangunan perekonomian antara lain. 1. Memperoleh dukungan pembangunan infrastruktur strategis seperti underpass Sip Tugu Ngurah Rai, pengembangan apron Bandara Internasional Igusti Ngurah Rai, pembangunan patung Garuda Wisnu Kencana, dan penanganan tempat pemrosesan air sampah regional sampah kita. Bahwa peningkatan jumlah kunjungan wisatawan lebih dari 35.000 orang. 3. Penambahan jumlah lapangan kerja mencapai 32.700 orang, meningkat 1,26%. 4. Peningkatan PDRB di atas 1,2 triliun dan peningkatan pertumbuhan ekonomi Bali mencapai lebih dari 6,5%. Serta peningkatan promosi dan citra pariwisata Bali dan Indonesia menjangkau 189 negara di seluruh dunia. Demikian pula untuk jangka panjang akan menjadi transfer of knowledge dari berbagai pakar yang akan dapat diterapkan dalam pembangunan nasional di Indonesia, termasuk dalam pembangunan daerah Bali. Oleh karena itu, sebagai Gubernur Bali sekaligus mewakili masyarakat Bali, saya menyambut baik dan bangga dengan pertemuan penting ini. Bapak Menteri yang terhormat dan hadirin yang berbahagia, demikianlah yang dapat saya sampaikan pada kesempatan yang terhormat ini. Semoga pikiran yang jernih datang dari segala penjuru. Selamat berdiskusi, semoga sukses. Sekian dan terima kasih. Om Santi 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 Om. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Rahayu.
Thank you to the Governor of Bali, Bapak Wayan Koster, for your remarks.
Bapak Wayan Koster, welcoming to all the participants to Bali, an island of beauty, diversity, and cultural uniqueness. He reminds us to learn from Balinese values of Tri Hita Kirana of respecting the higher power, humans, and nature. This local wisdom can inspire us to implement these values in pursuing national prosperity and a more inclusive growth. And also, he tells us Bali's culture of friendliness is wished to support the kind of international event to be successful. And it also hopes to contribute to the economic development of Bali by providing infrastructures.
Before we continue, we would like to extend a warm welcome to the Honorable Governor of West Java Province, Mr. Ridwan Kamil. Welcome to the event. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. The next agenda is the welcoming remarks from the President of IFAD. We cordially invite Mr. Gilbert Hongo to come to the stage.
Minister of National Development Planning, Honorable Governors, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to start by expressing on behalf of IFAD our deepest sympathy and condolences to the people of Indonesia for the tragic losses from the recent earthquake and tsunami. Particularly, Sulawesi has been the heartland of IFAD's engagement in Indonesia for many years. And for us, this tragedy reminds us that we must continue to invest more in building livelihood resilience, especially for marginalized people living in remote areas who are facing more frequently natural disasters. With this in mind, today's theme of inclusive economic growth could not be timelier. For nearly 40 years, Indonesia invested more than 1 billion to strengthen economic growth. Smallholder producers become more resilient to integrate into supply chains and to gain access to services, access to technologies, and access to finance. Our collaboration has directly benefited more than 3 million rural households. This is truly a partnership to celebrate, we think. But what do we exactly by inclusive economic growth? Who? What are we including? And why is it important? Let's consider that around the world, 3 billion people, about 40% of the global population, they live in the rural area of developing countries. They grow the food that feeds their nations, but they are also disproportionately poor. Here in Indonesia, as you know better than I do, 3 out of 5 live in rural areas. Most of them are farmers, and most of them are below the poverty line. While it is true that rural areas are making real progress and undergoing a remarkable transformation, they are still where poverty remains the most concentrated. Poverty is not just a state of low income. It is a condition of vulnerability, a condition of exclusion, and a condition of powerlessness. Overcoming these conditions in Indonesia and elsewhere requires empower marginalized group. Empower marginalized group, including smallholders farmers and small-scale fisheries. And within these groups, I would like to particularly highlight the women-headed households, the ethnic minorities, and the youth. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, we are truly in the midst of paradigm shifts in how we think about development. Today, rapid changes in regionalization and globalization are altering the food system. Urbanization and growth are transforming dietary patterns, leading to greater consumption of meat, fruits, and vegetables, as well as more processed food. In a globalized world, goods can be produced and consumed anywhere on Earth. Better transport and trade regimes mean that markets for agricultural products, including food, cash crops, and animal products, are increasingly regional. At the same time, global markets for agricultural goods are growing thanks to low-cost communications and increased trade. The result is that agriculture is shifting from a direct employer to a driver of rural transformation with greater opportunities in the farm and non-farm sector alike, and with a greater role for the private sector. the set of opportunities are expanding in the rural areas. Experience shows that smallholder agriculture can be transformed into profitable rural businesses that can supply regional and international markets, as well as local and national markets. These businesses are an integral part of rural transformation. And by incorporating these smallholders into value chains, economic growth can be inclusive. IFAD finances projects that enable smallholders to acquire the resources, skills, and technology to improve productivity and connect to the modern value chain and markets. For example, here in Indonesia, the Coastal Community Development Project helped coastal producers connect to markets, often through partnership with the private sector. Over the years, income has tripled or even quadrupled. It's also empowered women in the community. Apart from these socioeconomic impacts, the projects also showed communities how to manage their coastal resources in a more sustainable way. There has been a visible decline in illegal and destructive fishing practices, and the mangrove is being rehabilitated. This project recently received international recognition as the best practice for how to combine coastal value chains with natural resources management and community empowerment. Delegations from various countries, including Pakistan, India, have visited these projects to learn from it. IFAD has also facilitated successful partnership between smallholders and large companies, between Pacific Island coconut oil producers and the Body Shop, between Kenyan tomato producers and Heinz, Nigerian smallholders and Ola, and between Indonesia cocoa producers and Mars, just to name a few partnerships. The challenge is to create the right condition for smallholders and agripreneurs to engage with new businesses, new business opportunities throughout the developing world. Inclusive, market-led partnership make it possible for smallholder producers to thrive. However, brokering such partnership, we know, is not an easy task and does not happen automatically, not for us and neither for the private sector. And often, we do not achieve the right scale that will make our intervention cost-effective and profitable. This is why we need to work with committed partners in government, in the donor community, and the NGO communities, including the private sector, in a way for us to increase our impact and bring success to scale, so that agriculture can become at once an engine for economic growth, an engine for poverty reduction, and an engine for better nutrition and food security. Ladies and gentlemen, the world has more than 500 million, supporting more than 2 billion people. We know their potential, but we also know the challenge they face. One of the biggest challenges is building trusted relations with the private sector, which required developing and testing innovative solutions and scaling them up. But these are challenges we can and must overcome. Making special efforts for inclusive economic growth is the right thing to do, and it also makes good sense. Indeed, the OECD, the IMF, economists have noted that income inequality can lead to slower or less sustainable economic growth. We live in a global community. Our lives are increasingly connected and interdependent. For all our sake, marginalized groups need to catch up and keep pace with new prosperity, not fall further behind. Growth in itself will not be enough to meet the 2030 agenda and to create a world where no one is left behind. But economic growth that is inclusive will not happen automatically. We must make it happen. And working in partnership, I am confident that we can. Thank you so much.
Thank you to the President of IFED, Mr. Gilbert Hombo, for your remarks.
Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the next agenda is the keynote speech from the Minister of National Development Planning, Head of Bappenas. This speech will be followed by the official opening procession of the conference by the go-hitting and continue with photo session. We would like to cordially invite the Excellency Bapak Bambang Brojonegoro to come to the stage.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning to all of you. Excellency President of IFAD, Mr. Gilbert Hombo, representative from Ford Foundation, representative from ADB, Pak Asep from SMERU, and we have two new governors in this room. One, of course, the host, Governor of Bali, Bapak Wayan Koster, and Governor of West Java, Bapak Ridwan Kamil. And also, I would like to welcome speakers, Pak Hatip Basri, Pak Bambang Sudibyo. I think three of us now have mini reunion of the former Finance Minister of Indonesia. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, on behalf of Bappenas, I would like to thank for all of your participation and also the support from the sponsors to this seminar. And as mentioned by previous speakers, Gubernur Bali and Mr. Gilbert Hombo, it's quite clear that the issue of inclusive growth is very critical. We are not only talking about growth with quality, but we are talking about how to reduce the poverty and inequality. So let me start with the page number 5. Of course, everybody knows that for the first time in our history, Indonesia recorded, based on the socio-economic survey last March, Indonesia recorded the single-digit poverty rate at 9.82%. But I believe there is no reason to be pleased too quickly, because 9.82% is equivalent to 25.95 million population. So we still have very daunting task to reduce the poverty of 25.95 million, which is simply much bigger, for example, than population of many countries. Even bigger, for example, than the total population of Australia. So solving the poverty in Indonesia is like taking care of the whole country if we do the comparison with other parts of the world. And not only about the 25.95 millions. Although we have, I think, quite challenging issues, we still have the poverty line equivalent to $2.5 purchasing power parity. So sometimes it's debatable. That's why when the government announced the data, then there was discussion whether the poverty line is reasonable. But of course, we are trying to follow the international standard, and the international standard that we try to follow basically equivalent to $2.5 purchasing power parity. But we also acknowledge, aside from the people live under the poverty line, we still have 72 million people in Indonesia vulnerable. Vulnerable means it's easy for them to get back below poverty line. Why? So many reasons. First of all, of course, their spending is just a maximum 150% of the poverty line. So not much different with the poverty line itself. And then, of course, when there was natural catastrophe, natural disaster, when there was a sudden increase of the food price, or if there are problems with the family, like sickness and also economic crisis, this vulnerable group can easily be the part of the under poverty line. So they become the part of the poor people. And it means our standard now of 9.82% might not be safe if we do not take care of this vulnerable group. So this is the first issue I would like to raise. And also, if we look all across Indonesia, based by islands, first of all, our poverty in urban area actually relatively low, 7%. But the poverty in rural area still quite high and at 13%, or equivalent to 16 million people who live in rural area. So we would like to acknowledge the IFAD intervention that only focus on rural area, both on agriculture as well as the fishery, because those are the groups that now dominating the poor people in Indonesia. And if you look across the islands, of course, Java is relatively okay because the poverty line is already 8%. Although in rural area in Java, which has quite a significant amount of population, the rural poverty still at almost 13%. So still, there is a problem of poverty in Java, especially in rural area, related to the agriculture sector. On other parts of Indonesia, of course, you will notice on the eastern part of Indonesia, the poverty rate is still above 20%, like in Maluku and Papua. In Bali, Nusa Tenggara, especially on the Nusa Tenggara Barat and East Nusa Tenggara, they still have, I think, quite high poverty rate. So the poverty issue in Indonesia is not well distributed, so we have to focus on certain areas. We have to focus especially on rural areas in order to reduce the poverty in Indonesia. Again, when the government announced the 9.82%, some people criticized why the decline in poverty rate is rather slow compared to the previous period. Of course, we know very well, once the poverty rate is at relatively low level, especially when the poverty rate very close to the so-called extreme poverty rate, then it will become more difficult, it will become harder to reduce the poverty itself. Because then you have to deal with specific groups that may be harder to reach, they are difficult to access, or they simply do not want to get the government support in order to improve their life because maybe they are comfortable with the way they live right now. Other than those issues, several things that government needs to improve. For example, we still have the 10% majority of the lowest welfare level only reaches informal financial services. So lack of financial services is one of the reasons why our poverty reduction is declining. The other is, of course, lack of the access to the telecommunication network. 13 out of 34 provinces still have bad telecommunication signal in rural areas. So if we travel around Indonesia, sometimes we are okay if we are still in the capital of the province. But once you go deeper into the rural area, sometimes you cannot get the signal. Meaning that if you cannot get the signal, then of course it will hinder you to do better or to have better access to the economic activities. And that will, of course, slow down our poverty rate reduction. The other, of course, very critical issue, distribution of land ownership. The majority of land is controlled by the resident with the highest level welfare of 20%. So 20% highest income group in Indonesia dominating the land ownership. And if we are talking back to the issue in Java, in rural area, especially in agriculture sector, we know that they will be part of the poverty simply because the average land holding of every farmer in Java less than 0.5 hectares. If you have the land less than 0.5 hectares, then it's hard to have the economic of scale. It means even though you have the land, most probably you will still be part of the poor income group or low income group. The other, of course, natural disasters. Now, with what happened in Lombok and Palu, we cannot underestimate the effect of natural disaster. It's not just one-time incident, but I think once we have natural disaster, especially at the scale like in Lombok and especially in Palu, then we can identify we will have increasing poverty rate during the period of rehabilitation and after that reconstruction. And of course, we know that majority of area in Indonesia very prone to natural disaster. It means that we need to have kind of contingency plan. We need to have the plan to deal with the natural disaster related to the poverty. Because like in Palu now, some people cannot do their economic activities because they cannot even stay in their houses because they are still traumatic with the aftershocks. So once the economic activity is not moving, let's say in Central Sulawesi, in Palu, then of course nobody gets the income except if there is intervention from the government, and as a result, there is a probability that the number of poverty rate, especially in the area, will be increasing. So again, we cannot underestimate the natural disaster in the issue of poverty. Moving a little bit to the issue of inequality, we know that our latest Gini ratio is 0.389, while in the urban area, I think inequality is still quite high, still at 0.401, so still above 0.4. But in rural area, actually the inequality is much lower, but little bit increasing on March 2018 at 0.324. But of course, we cannot say that inequality is okay in rural area because it is quite low. We have to understand this is related to the poverty because our poverty rate is higher in rural than in urban area. It means if we have low inequality in rural area, it's simply because everybody is poor. So this is equality of poverty in rural area, and it's not good for us. It means, again, our focus when we are dealing with the poverty and inequality has to be in rural area. What are the factors that affecting inequality in Indonesia? Of course, more importantly, inequality of the basic access service. Different type of access, education, health, housing, clean water, sanitation, and electricity. If you don't have the access to one of them, it's easy for you to be poor. Later, I will tell you a story about the involvement of the Zakat National Agency in a village in Jambi that never enjoyed electricity since our independence. For 73 years, they live in the dark. Now they got the electricity. It means this is just the first step for that village to get rid of the poverty. Before that, they are simply in poverty because they don't even get the access of electricity. The other factor would be employment inequality. It will be related not only to the access to the job, but more importantly on the skill. Some people are has much more skill than the others, and of course, one group will have the luxury of choosing the jobs they want, but the other groups will have difficulty even to find a single job for their life. So this is the type of inequality that's happening quite a lot in Indonesia. The other would be inequality of income and assets. I already mentioned about the land ownership of farmers in Java, and then the lack of social safety nets, especially when the shocks occur. Again, I would like to reiterate the importance of dealing with natural disaster, because once natural disaster strikes, then actually there has to be mechanism, there has to be kind of social security, so the victims of natural disaster can deal with the aftershocks, can deal with the rehabilitation and later reconstruction period. So those are the issues in Indonesia, the latest issues related to the poverty and inequality. So let me try now moving to the concept or what will be the ideal inclusive growth that we should have in Indonesia. So in order to have inclusive growth, we need to start with the poverty reduction program. And poverty reduction program cannot rely only on government assistance directly to the poor household. That will be one of the requirements, but that's not all. Because aside from the government support, basically for minimum level of services, they also need the access of the health, education, and also nutrition. I think those are the factors that becoming the start of reducing the poverty. And of course, with all the good access, we might have people with high productivity, people with competitiveness. And they will be the ones that get the job opportunity. And where does the job opportunity come from? The job opportunity comes from if there are increasing purchasing power. So at the end, if we are trying to reduce the poverty, it has to be followed by reduction of unemployment. And then once we have higher job opportunity, reduction of unemployment, we might have higher and sustained growth, because then people will be more productive. If we have higher and sustained growth, then at the end, we will be able to reduce inequality naturally without too much government intervention, reducing the poverty with the similar ideas, and of course, the political stability. Bappenas and SMERU already constructed the so-called inclusive economic development indicator. And we have three pillars of this index. The first pillar is economic growth, second one, income equality and poverty reduction, and third one, improving access and opportunity. So these are the three pillars how we deal with the inclusiveness and including poverty reduction. Economic growth is a must, because if there is no economic growth, how can we distribute the economy itself? And then second pillar, income equality and poverty reduction. So clearly, poverty reduction program has to be one of the main activities. And the third pillar, improving access and opportunity. And of course, we can see the sub-pillar under economic growth, aside from economic growth itself, is employment opportunity and infrastructure. And then on second pillar, inequality and poverty. And then on the third pillar, the sub-pillar is human capability, basic infrastructure, and financial inclusion. In total, we have 21 indicators, and we try to calculate not only for national level, but also every province. So let's see the result first at national level. If we try to measure this inclusiveness in Indonesia from 2011 to 2017, we can see that Indonesia development is more inclusive. As you can see on the left side, the index has been increasing from 4.83 2011 to 5.47 in 2017. So it has been a quite good improvement. Every pillar contributes to this improvement: economic growth, income equality and poverty reduction, as well as improving access and opportunity. However, on the third pillar, you can see, I think there was stagnation between 2016 to 17. So this could lead to a good input in our development policy. We need to keep improving access and opportunity. So, since the host, Governor of Bali, Pak Wayan Koster, is here, I would like to mention Bali, if we compare all 34 provinces, is the fourth most inclusive province in Indonesia in 2017. So it's very good performance, because if you look at Bali, the positive factor would be high economic growth, low poverty rate, high human capabilities and access to opportunities, as well as high gender equality and low economic inequality. So basically all the qualitative aspect of development already managed well by the Bali government. But of course, Pak Gubernur has to pay attention on negative factor. Only one, which is the low share of manufacturing to the GDP. It means Pak Governor needs to increase the value added in Bali, especially the value added from handicraft, value added from other type of activities in Bali. Once you can increase the value added, hopefully the share of manufacturing to GDP will be increasing. In the case of Bali, what makes Bali unique? I think everybody knows about the tourism and also concern on affirmative policies for the poor. I think without even the so-called poverty reduction national program, Bali already has its own local poverty reduction program. So I think this is the uniqueness about the Bali. But the question is, what makes Bali vulnerable? I think we need to pay attention about internal shocks like natural disaster, like Mount Agung eruption, as well as external shocks. Because tourism is so dominant in Bali, to some extent there was dependence of Bali to the tourism. So if something happens that affects tourism, it will affect right away to the Bali economy. Like when there is eruption of Mount Agung, we recorded, I think, the slowdown of tourists, number of tourists visiting Bali, as well as long time ago when there was problem with Bali bombing 1, Bali bombing 2, there was also steep decline of tourists visiting Bali. So it means Bali needs to have some kind of contingency plan, especially for natural disaster, because we cannot afford that Bali economy suddenly collapse just because of the tourism. We need to have some kind of contingency plan. And then, contingency plan meaning that we should have the strategy to mitigate the risk of tourism factors. So, what are the strategies of government in the latest 5 years planning, 2015-2019? In general, we have three main strategies. Comprehensive social protection system, which is very important, especially for people who live under poverty line, especially the extreme poverty. And then basic services development and sustainable livelihood. And again, I would like to applaud IFAD because IFAD has been quite active in sustainable livelihoods, especially the one that I visited in Lombok, in a fishery village in Lombok. They are not only helping the fishermen to do better fishery activities, but more importantly, they do the training and education for the families to do value adding of their fishery product, not only fish, but also seaweed. So they are trying to create sustainable livelihoods at that village. On the issue of basic services development, I think we need to learn to some extent from India. I was in India early last week, in New Delhi, for the conference called Mahatma Gandhi International Sanitation Conference. The conference is just all about sanitation, something that maybe we would like to get rid of, because sanitation, of course, is not an interesting topic to deal with. But why they have that conference? Because India has recorded remarkable success in reducing open defecation. They have been able to reduce open defecation from 600 million population 4 years ago to only now 150 million. Of course, 150 million is quite big, but considering that their total population is 1.3 or 1.2 billion people. They have been able to do that simply because they have national program on improving sanitation, led by the Prime Minister himself. So this kind of activity is something that we need to do in Indonesia, because when India already has 150 million people still still having open defecation, Indonesia also still has about 40 million of our population doing open defecation. So we need still to work hard. This is part of poverty reduction and reducing inequality. As a result of our effort in improving social protection budget has been increasing. Not only for program like PKH, Program Keluarga Harapan, it also for now non-cash delivery for food subsidy, as well as other type of programs. But again, this program is important to substitute the energy subsidy, to substitute the fuel subsidy. So Indonesia slowly leave the fuel subsidy behind and trying to focus on the government support targeted directly to the poor household. It is much more difficult for sure, because we need to have accurate data, we need to verify the data once every 6 months, but we have to do that. Otherwise, our poverty reduction will be even slower without doing that. To close this speech, I would like to acknowledge the role of Islamic Social Fund, Zakat and Waqf in reducing poverty and inequality. We have Pak Bambang Sudibyo here as the chair of Zakat National Agency. We know the potential of Zakat is big, although the actual collection is still relatively low, but at least with the limited amount of Zakat, they already have, I think, different programs to combat poverty all around Indonesia. And more importantly, this instrument, Zakat, has also the role to moderate the social gap, because this is from so-called the people with the ability to the people that do not have the ability in terms of the income. And don't forget also about Waqf. Of course, only 66% of Waqf land in Indonesia is certified, meaning only 66% can be utilized. And we need to, of course, improve the certification in order to improve the utilization of Waqf. And if you look at some of their activities in Zakat, Pak Bambang and myself went to Jambi a month ago, as I mentioned, to launch the micro hydro power plant in one of the poorest villages in Jambi that I just mentioned. never experienced electricity during our along our independence, 73 years. Now they have electricity. Not only that, because of the electricity, they now have the way to get rid of the poverty, because they can use different type of equipment in order to increase the value added of their agriculture product. So they are not simply selling the raw product, but they start doing a simple processing of their agriculture commodity. And Zakat also already empower village program called Desa Berdaya in 1,056 villages all around Indonesia, with the coverage around 2 million people. So this is a small start maybe, but this is very important start. The government and non-government needs to work hand in hand to reduce the poverty. If we follow what President Hongbo mentioned about sustainable development goal, no one left behind, it means government cannot work alone. Government needs to get another support. And the support from the Islamic Social Fund like Zakat, I think is very critical to helping government reducing poverty at the better way. On WAF, I think they have done a project, Islamic Hospital of Mali. They are building the private wing of the Islamic hospital using the WAF land, and then the private wing already get break-even point in less than 7 years, and of course they will contribute to the operation of the hospital itself, and it will help, of course, people in general that will look for health services. And they already also participate in the activity to improve the agriculture as well as some property activities. But more importantly, it's not about the property, it's not about the agricultural activities, it's about how can Islamic Social Fund, in this case WAF, can be helping the people with the needs or helping to reduce the poverty. I think I would like to end my speech in page 22, in which we need to do many things in order to promote more inclusive development. First of all, strengthening aspired middle income group. I think middle income group is very critical in Indonesia. Middle income group is a symbol of the development of Indonesia. Currently, we have around 40 million middle income in Indonesia out of our 260 million population. In our forecast, in 2045, 100 years of our independence, when our population 320 million population, we might have middle income class around 250 to 160 million. And this is very important to have this big group of middle income, because then Indonesia can become a more developed country. What will be their aspiration? Of course, they want to do everything easier, like getting business licenses and also startup, SME, I think will be their aspiration. And of course, they would like to have more skill and of course more expertise as a labor. And then we need to enhance Dana Desa. We need to enhance village fund to the lowest income group, especially when we are talking about empowerment of the rural people. We need to develop, we need to reduce the disparity between Java and outside Java, meaning that development effort needs to be directed more outside Java, especially to improving the connectivity infrastructure outside Java, as well as strengthening local product development and supply chain product for the export product. Last but not least, this is a digital era, this is IT era, so we need to utilize our IT to extend the outreach and better public services, as well as to stimulate innovation and creative ideas that can be enjoyed by all levels of society. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, but please remain on the stage, because we will proceed to the next agenda on the opening procession of the International Conference on Inclusive Economic Growth, Reducing Poverty and Inequality. The procession will be marked by gong hitting by the Minister of National Development Planning, Head of Bappenas. We would like to invite the President of IFAD, Mr. Gilbert Humbo, and also the Governor of Bali, Bapak Wayan Koster, to come to the stage, and together with Minister Bambang to officially open the event by hitting the gong. Please come to the stage. May we assist the procession by counting to it down. Let us count together in 3, 2, 1. The gong hitting has officially opened the International Conference on Inclusive Economic Growth, Reducing Poverty and Inequality as a part of the 2019 IMF World Bank Group annual meeting. So Minister Bambang, Mr. Gilbert Humbo, and Bapak Wayan Koster, please remain on the stage for a moment as we are proceeding to the photo session. And also we invite to the stage to have a photo session Mr. Ron Hartman, Mr. Paul Winters, Bapak Ridwan Kamil, Bapak Bambang Sudibyo, Bapak Chatib Basri, Bapak Rafiuddin Falirungi, Ibu Yeni Zanuba Wahid, Bapak Leonard Tapubolon, Bapak Pungki Sumadi, Bapak Gerlin Yusuf, and also Ibu Amalia Adinigar to come to the stage to have a photo session. Thank you, and please be seated.
We would like to apologize that due to another commitment, the Minister of National Development Planning, Bappenas, will soon leave the event. Thank you for your participation. We really appreciate your attendance. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, before sessions, we would like to inform you that the questions, inputs, or suggestions can be submitted through Slido web application. To help you to access this application, we have provided step-by-step guide at the screen. We would like to remind you to use the hashtag inclusive growth along the proposed questions, suggestions, or inputs. Questions can be submitted during the presentation from the speakers.
Well, Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, now we come up to the panel discussion session 1. So now we are trying to prepare for the session 1.
would like to remind all excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. We would like to inform you that the questions, inputs, suggestions can be submitted through Slido web application. To help you to access this application, we have provided step-by-step guide at the screen in front of you. And don't forget to use the hashtag inclusive growth along the proposed questions, suggestions, or inputs.
Well, Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, now we would like to invite all the distinguished speakers and also the moderator, Bapak Asep Suharyadi, to come to the stage and start the session panel 1. For Bapak Asep Suharyadi, time is yours. And also we cordially invite Bapak Muhammad Chatik Basri, Mr. Paul Winters, and also Bapak Ridwan Kamil to come to the stage.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session, economic growth and development agenda. As mentioned by the MC, I am Asep Suharyadi from the SMERU Research Institute. Will become the moderator for these sessions. Indonesia from 2013 2014, and before that he was the chairman of the Investment Coordinating Agency, the IKPN, from 2012 to 2013. He has a PhD in economics from the Australian National University. Our second speaker is Professor Paul Winters. He's the Associate Dean of IFAD, Strategy and Knowledge. Before that, he was the Director of Research and Impact Evaluation. And before joining IFAD, he was a Professor of Economics at American University. He has a PhD in Agricultural and Resources Economics from University of California, Berkeley. The third speaker is Governor Ridwan Kamil. He's an architect actually, and he has been elected as the new governor of the West Java province, and he has just been inaugurated last month on the 5th of September, so congratulations, Bapak. He is a famous mayor of the city of Bandung. Bandung is the capital of West Java and well known as the creative city in Indonesia. Governor Kamil has a master in urban design, also from the University of California, Berkeley. So he went to the same school, yeah. I actually had to went to the same school also to ANU. In terms of the substance, President IFAD earlier has mentioned that inclusive economic growth will not happen automatically. I think we have to remember that. We have to make it happen. It means that we have to have strategy, we have to have policy, we have to have programs, we have to have initiative in order to achieve inclusive economic growth. And our speakers today, interestingly, will complement each other in terms of this our efforts to achieve inclusive economic growth from different perspectives. Dr. Basri will look at from the national perspective, what has happened, what has been developed, and what has been implemented, while Professor Winters will look at from the international global level, but focusing at the rural areas and the agricultural sector. What needs to be done there to achieve inclusive economic growth. And the last one, Governor Kamil, perhaps will share his experience with us in developing policies in the Bandung city, but also perhaps his plan for the West Java province. And I think West Java province is one of very important area to achieve poverty reduction in Indonesia, because West Java is the second largest contributor of poor people in this country. So if West Java can reduce poverty significantly, it will have a very significant impact on the national poverty rate. So since we have limited time now, I think we only left with 1.5 hours. We'll give our speakers a maximum of 20 minutes each. So without further ado, I will ask Dr. Basri to give his presentation. You can stay here or you can go to the stage. Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi dan salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Very good morning to all of you. It is a great pleasure to be here. In this session, I would like to share my view regarding the inclusive growth on the perspective from Indonesia. And since my background as a former finance minister, my approach is pretty much about from the macro perspective and also from the fiscal side about what the government can do and should do in order to achieve this inclusive growth. It's a bit difficult to talk about this issue because this morning during the keynote speech, Minister Bambang Brojonegoro has already laid out all the problems. So probably I'll focus on some issues because I don't want to, because some of the issues that I would like to raise is already discussed by Minister Bambang. But let me start with the comparison of the Central Asia, is the international comparison regarding the relationship between economic growth and poverty. So this chart, clearly explain that there is a strong positive relationship between the economic growth and the poverty reduction. Apologize if I'm using many slides here, but I promise to you I'll speak to in the human language. The problem with economists is they always like to speak in the language that nobody can understand. And the more people confused, the better they are as an economist. So let me speak in the human language. If you look at on this chart, it is quite clear that when the GDP growth increased from example like the 1990 to 2001, look at the case of the Central Asia or Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia or Central Asia here, the SEA and EA, for example, you could see when the economic growth is relatively high and the poverty reduction was also high. So there's a very strong correlation between the economic growth. And then the explanation I think is quite simple, it's very intuitive, because when you produce economic growth, you can create and you do the employment creation, then people get a job that will reduce the poverty. Of course, the question is what kind of job. Whether this growth will create the so-called more friendly, employment-friendly job or not. But this is the reason why I think Minister Bambang mentioned in his keynote speech that it is important to have this economic growth. So I think the empirical evidence supported that. But at the same time, look at this issue, and this is not unique only for Indonesia. It's happening in many countries all over the world. Look at in the case, for example, like look at what happened in Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, India, and Indonesia. So there is a tendency, there is a trend that inequality is rising. So with those two issues, then I would like to discuss what the government should do and can we do to address this problem. But before that, let me try to elaborate some of the problem that might increase or create a problem of this poverty. Let me, if we look at the case of the globalization in the 90s, every economist believed that we open up the economy and then the political system will follow suit automatically. But if you look at the new trend in the last, I would say in the last probably 5 years, there is a tendency, a resistance towards globalization. And this is not only unique in Indonesia. If you look at the outcome of the election in the US, if you look at the anti-immigrant mood in Europe, if you look at the new trend, the economic nationalism, and one of the reasons behind it is because the rising of the inequality. So like it or not, we cannot only rely on this promoting economic growth, but we have to address the issue of inequality. That's the reason why we need an inclusive growth. So one of the reasons behind it is, it's a very interesting, it's about the labor saving. And this has to do with the technology. On the one hand, it is true that technology will save us in the sense that it will make our life much easier, become more efficient, especially nowadays with the digital, related to the digital technology. But don't forget, the one who get a benefit on this, when they produce the technology, is the one who has this or who has the relatively high skill. That's what we call the premium skill. If we're talking about the digital technology, if you're talking about the most successful, talking about Jeff Bezos, talking about Mark Zuckerberg, the people who has an ability to produce the startup, they have a very good background of education, good access on information. They could come up with a various idea of the innovation. But the implication is, there is a risk of the job replacement. Of course, the question is what will be the net effect between the job creation and the job replacement. But like it or not, in the short term, there will be an issue about rising inequality. Because on the one hand, there is a group of people, very small group of people with the premium skill. But on the other hand, we have to deal with a group of people, maybe a majority, with the unskilled. That, their relative income, although both of them are rising, but there will be the impact of the rising inequality. The second one that I would like to discuss here, Minister Bambang did not mention about this issue specifically, but I think I would like to discuss this issue rather extensive. Probably not many people discuss about this issue. In 2003, it was 2003 if I'm not mistaken, we submitted the labor law. And this labor law, the idea of this labor law is very long, because the idea is to want to protect the labor. So that is why we introduced what we call the minimum wage, the severance payment. It is very interesting because the idea is to want to protect the worker. But probably not many of us realize that Indonesia is probably a country with the highest severance payment in the world. This labor law acts like a hiring tax. Many companies try to avoid to absorb the new worker. Because one day, if they get to deal to do the downsizing, they have to pay 24 months or 32 months. Because this labor law acts like a hiring tax, then many of investment shift from the labor-intensive into the capital-intensive sector. And that's one of the plausible explanation why the inequality rising in Indonesia since 2004, 2003. Because the investor, it's much easy for them, it's much more comfortable for them to invest on the capital-intensive sector rather than labor-intensive sector. Yeah. So unless we do something on this labor market, I'm afraid this trend may continue. The second one is, the other one is about the financial market liberalization. The people in the financial market, they get the return very high. If you look at the performance, look at what happened in the stock market, in the bond market, before the financial turbulence which is happening in the last couple of months, they get a return every year about 15 to 20% if you invest in the stock market. But if you look at the share of the labor income, steadily decline, or at least stagnant. That's also creating the issue of this inequality. The other thing is the commodity price. The commodity boom, which has happened since between the 2002 and 2014, actually also triggered the issue of this inequality. Because the one who get a benefit from this commodity boom is very limited group of people. And because this commodity boom, we can have a discussion about it. I would like to argue that probably Indonesia in the last, from 2002 to 2014, we experienced what economists call the Dutch disease. Because the commodity boom, there was an overvaluation of the exchange rate. When the exchange rate was too expensive, then it is not attractive for the investor to invest on this manufacturing sector. They invest more on the coal, on the CPO, on the commodity sector. So as a result, there is a shift of the investment from the manufacturing, which is labor intensive, into more natural resources intensive. So as a result, it's also triggered of the rising of the inequality. The other thing Pak Bambang mentioned about it, I don't want to discuss in very detail because Pak Bambang already discussed about it. Inequality in access of education, health, financial services, infrastructure. Pak Bambang mentioned in his speech about the poor quality of infrastructure. And the other things is about the demography, the aging population. We are lucky that Indonesia is still in this, the demographic bonus, the demographic dividend. We probably have this demographic dividend by 2025, if I'm not mistaken. But one thing that I would like to remind us, by 2060, Indonesia will start to enter the aging population. While it is true Indonesia will become the 4th largest economies in the world by 2045, but don't forget by that time, if you look at the prediction using the income per capita growth, our income per capita by 2045 probably around less than $30,000 at a time. I would like to compare with Korea and Japan. When Korea and Japan, when they entered the problem of the aging population, the income per capita already more than 40,000. So unless we boost the economic growth, there is a risk for us to grow old without becoming rich. And this is a problem. This is the thing that we probably need to discuss. The other thing is about the corruption and high-cost economy, because the one who take the benefit of this is really the skewed distribution of the people. Now let me lay out some of the policy response. Let me check whether I'm okay with time. Hopefully, yeah. I still have this 8 minutes. So the policy response to promote growth. The first one is promote more employment-friendly economic growth. We see that even though the economic growth, for example, like from 2002 to 2014, we grew by an average almost 6% at that time. But if you look at the impact, the rising inequality, and one of the reasons is because the economic growth was not very environment friendly. It was driven more by the natural resources intensive sector, by the capital intensive sector, and one of the reasons behind it, as I mentioned, because the overvaluation of the exchange rate, the mild Dutch disease, and the rigidity of the labor market. So I think we need to do a sort of like a correction on this issue. That is why I mentioned about it is very important to improve the labor law. The thing is, this is easier to be said than done. In many cases in Europe, in Australia, reforming the labor market is a very difficult thing, because as a politician is always trying to avoid this issue. As Jean-Claude Juncker said, we all know what to do, but we just don't know how to get re-elected after we've done it. So I think the political economy issues become very crucial. The other thing is to improve the quality of human capital. I think Indonesia is really at the crossroads now. We cannot continue to boost our economy only based on this cheap labor, because we cannot compete with Bangladesh, for example. Their wages is only 1/3 compared to us. But at the same time, if we want to move into the capital-intensive sector, we don't have enough good quality of the human capital. So I think it is very important for us to go to focus more on the issue of this human capital, which I believe that this current administration is doing it. Yeah. The other thing is, I'll spend more time later on the fiscal quality spending, etc. But let me talk a little bit about the improvement of the quality of human capital. How we are going to do it? If we send kids to school, it's going to take probably one generation. It's going to take probably about 25 years. At the MOF, when I was at the MOF, we introduced the so-called LPDP with this scholarship that anybody who get accepted at the top 200 universities in the world will be eligible for this scholarship. But this will take one generation. So one of the shortest cut to improve the quality of human capital is by vocational training. But the problem is the government budget is limited. And the other problem is, unfortunately, I have to tell you frankly, many of the graduates from the government training center need to be retrained again. Why? Because the quality of the equipment, the machine, etc. So my proposal is, rather than government spending money on this, the government training center, why don't we ask the private sector to do it and give a tax deductible? If they do the evaluation center, if they do the training, if they do the R&D, that will be sort of like a bit of shortcut. Or if we invite the foreign direct investment to come, we ask them to provide the R&D in this country. Yeah. The other thing is, I mentioned about this other economy. Now let me move on the spending side. Look at this. From 2015 to 2017, for example, we've been improving on this allocation of the social spending. Yeah. And also exactly what Minister Babang said, we reduced the subsidies. Yeah. And disbursement for the improvement, the disbursement in terms of this disbursement improved actually from 2015 to 2017, for example, like on the capital spending, and we reduced the energy subsidies. But the other thing that I would like to highlight on this issue from the fiscal perspective, if we want to protect, if we want to allocate more money for education, for health, for social spending, we need to have a buffer for the tax revenue collection. But if you look at this chart, because against the collapse of the commodity prices, there is a tendency that our tax revenue to GDP steadily declined. Even in the 2017 was less than 10%. So I think it is very important. This is what the government is doing now, is working on this issue, trying to mobilize the tax revenue. Because without having this strong buffer for the tax revenue, it would be difficult for us to allocate more money for the social spending. The other thing, look at this budget was spent on the regressive energy subsidies. Minister Babang mentioned about there's been a lot of effort has been undertaken by the government to reduce the fuel subsidies. But yet, if you look at from this chart, let me speak again in the human language, the richest are the one who get a benefit from the fuel subsidy. Why is that? Because they are the one who consume the gasoline. They are the one who use this, the link between the poor people and the fuel subsidy when they go through the public transport, because kerosene is no longer there. So the one who get a benefit from this fuel subsidy definitely is the richest. Yeah. And if you look at about the conditional cash transfer, which is the current program, or before was the cash transfer, is more pro for the poor. And that's the reason why Minister Bambang mentioned during his speech the government try to relocate the fuel subsidies into more targeted subsidies, which is the direct subsidy to the poor people. But the question is, how are we going to target these poor people? Because this is very difficult. It's easier to be said than done. We know that fuel subsidy is aggressive subsidy. The cash transfer and conditional cash transfer is very important. But the question is, how are we going to, to target the poor? Let me give some experience. This is very interesting. I can share it now. Rather than targeting the poor, probably it is better to let the poor to identify themselves. How are we going to do it? If you recall, probably in the process in 2005, 2008, 2013, when we did this cash transfer, the process was very difficult, especially in 2005. So one of the interesting and important findings based on that, you probably recall during that time, people have to queue probably about almost from the morning until afternoon to collect the money for 150,000 rupiah. The interesting part is, only the desperate one, the poor people will stay. Because if you come from the middle and upper class, you don't want to spend the whole day only for 150,000 rupiah. When the process of this distributing the money becomes very difficult, and by signaling device of the market device, the poor will identify themselves. If you are really poor, you will stay. But if you come from the middle and upper class, then you don't want to spend your time queuing only for about more than 8 hours only to get 15,000 rupiah, 150,000 rupiah. So based on that, the market signal could help us to provide a benefit of this data. And then I do believe that the MP2, which is the institution under the Vice President office, has done a lot of work related to this issue. So we have a much better database, even though it's not perfect. So I think, in my view, this will be visible to increase the conditional cash transfer, etc. So with that, I'll conclude my. I'm out of time. It's 20 minutes already. I would like to conclude. I think it is important for us. Number one is to focus on the employment-friendly growth, economic growth. The second one is to allocate more spending for the health, education, on the social spending. And the third one, in order to ensure that we have enough money for this allocation of spending, we need to mobilize funds through increase of the revenue collection. Last but not least, I think there's a lot of things can be done from the macroeconomic perspective, especially related to the issue of the exchange rate, to the rigidity in the labor market. If we do some deregulation in the labor market, I do believe this will have some improvement of this inclusive growth in the future. I'll stop it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Basri, for a very comprehensive overview of inclusive economic development policy in Indonesia. Dr. Basri has identified that the biggest challenge to achieving inclusive economic development in Indonesia is the increasing inequality, and he has identified so many factors behind this phenomenon of increasing inequality. But he also offered several recommendations, several policy options. I counted the rightly spent points that he proposed. I'm sure that our colleagues here have taken note of those suggestions, and maybe hopefully to include it in the next National Medium-Term Development Plan. Next, we move to the second speaker, Professor Volunteer, who will share his discussions on how rural and agricultural development can help achieve inclusive economic growth.
Thank you. So I want to talk about inclusive growth in agriculture. And the first thing to think about, which may not seem obvious to you, is that you have to actually measure where the poor are. What shocks me in many countries that I visit is that they don't do that. And one of the things that struck me in the talk of the minister, and also the Minister of Villages was in at IFAD is the emphasis here in Indonesia on data. If you look at data and you look where the poor are, you immediately see that the percent of poor in rural areas is higher in every country that you go to. Without that kind of data, many countries have had urban bias programs. They focus on the urban areas and focus on industrialization. And they fail to recognize that many of the poor, the majority of the poor, are in rural areas. So the first key thing to think about is that data. So here in Indonesia, my understanding from the earlier talk is 13.2% poverty rates in rural areas, around 8% in urban areas. But if you look at the percentage, 3 out of 5 that are in rural areas. So if you want to attack poverty, you have to think in terms of, what am I going to do in rural areas? The next thing, again, to think about is, what are the challenges? What are the things that are keeping people from getting out of poverty, particularly in rural areas? And what strategy are you going to come up with? And again, watching the talk earlier, I was impressed by Indonesia's efforts in thinking through, we know where the poverty is, what can we do about it? And the talk just now also focused on these kind of issues. But again, I can't emphasize this enough. I travel to a lot of countries around the world, and it is unusual to actually see that focus. To actually say, here's the data, and here's what we're going to do based on that data. So I think just from the very beginning, we see that Indonesia is ahead of many others in doing this. Then as part of that, you see the challenges, you have to come up with a strategy. And the strategy has to be multi-pronged. First is you need economic growth, as was just mentioned. If you don't have that economic growth, you're not going to get anywhere. I shared the stage with the Minister of Finance in Bangladesh about 3 or 4 months ago. And one of the things that struck me about what he said is that if you want to get rid of rural poverty, you have to have agricultural growth of 4 to 5% just to start. So you can't think of reducing rural poverty unless agricultural growth is going 4 or 5%. Then after you do that, you can start thinking about, can we do actually something about rural poverty? So you need that economic growth. A second part of the strategy should be social protection. We've seen here in Indonesia early experiments a decade ago with unconditional cash transfers, and now I understand that you have conditional cash transfers that are helping increase investment in health and education. These are important. These help the poor, but it is a way to break the intergenerational transmission of poverty. You invest in the children of the poor. You hope that they then will have higher human capital, and that will be as part of the overall strategy one to develop. But along with this, there should be a third part. So growth, social protection, and that's a productive pathway out of poverty. People need to have their own opportunities. They need to be able to produce for themselves so they can get out of poverty. And this is where the agricultural dimension comes in. That you want to invest in things that allow people to take themselves out of poverty. You need to provide them with land, with finance, etc., in order that that productive pathway can be had. Now, in the agricultural sector, it's an interesting time. It's no longer an agriculture than we had in the past, where people produce just staple crops, where they're producing rice and maize and wheat around the world. Agriculture is transforming. We see in countries like Indonesia, half the population is now in urban areas. With that comes a dietary transformation. People are not just eating staple goods. They're eating fruits and vegetables. They're eating more meat. They're eating processed goods. The agricultural value chain becomes more important. And so when you think about rural poverty reduction, you can't just think, can I increase the productivity of rice or maize or wheat? You have to think, how can I increase the profitability of agriculture itself? How can I build on a value chain in this transforming rural economy? So a key part of this is to recognize that this rural economy is transforming. Even in the United States, where I'm from, less than 1% of the economically active population is in agriculture. But if you look at those linked to agriculture, it's 12% of the economically active population. Agribusiness is incredibly important in every country. And so you have to think in terms of that value chain. Now with that transformation and that inclusive transformation, IFAD did a study a few years back, a rural development report on rural transformation. We looked at 60 countries around the world and we checked to see, was their structure of their economy changing? A shift from agriculture to industry and services. Was their rural economy changing? A shift from a focus most on agriculture to a focus on agribusiness, on value chains. And with that was poverty reducing. And what we found was that while you have structural transformation, agricultural transformation, you do not always get poverty reduction. You do in some cases, but not in all cases. In order to get that poverty reduction, you have to be proactive. As the president of EFAD said earlier, inclusion does not happen automatically. It must be made to happen. And so this comes from a number of studies, and we saw that 14 countries managed to do this out of the 60. And in those cases where you had poverty reduction, it was because of active policies. So thinking in terms of agriculture, we have to recognize this broader agriculture and agribusiness that go along with it, the value chain. And we need to think of where we can invest. It's not up there now, but there was a question that was put up there earlier. In central Java, if you have average 0.3 hectares per land, how can you actually get poverty reduction? How do you empower farmers? And it's a challenge. One thing you need to do is to organize them in such a way they can take advantage of opportunities. It's pretty hard, though, to get ahead on 0.3 hectares if you're focusing on a commodity that's not going to be high value. You have to think of what can be high value and how can you organize farmers in such a way to take advantage. In many EFAD projects, what we do is we get a group of farmers that are working together in a village or community. We organize them in such a way that they can meet the demands of the market. Now, remember what a market needs. They want quality and timing. I once interviewed the buyer for Frito-Lay for potatoes in Ecuador and asked him, why don't you buy from smallholders? And he said, I'm perfectly happy to buy from smallholders, but I'm not dealing with 1,000 of them. He got half this production from 8 farmers. The other half he just bought on the open market. So there's a project there to link smallholders to that market. So he wanted, and he was happy to work with them, but he wanted it quality. It had to be 5 to 9 centimeters big potato. It had to be above 1,500 acres, 1,500 meters in altitude, because lower than that, the sugar content was too high. He wanted it every week for potatoes to show up. And so what we did is we organized the farmers, all smallholders, and they had this great graph that had all of the different farmers, when they were going to produce, when they were going to harvest, and when they were going to deliver. And because of that, the sales went from $3 per bag to $11 per bag. Not only that, because we also provided technical support to those farmers, their yields went up. They switched the variety they were using. The variety they had before had these latent viruses that reduced the production. So they had got more production. So more production, higher price. These are the kind of opportunities that you need to use. And recognizing that you need to link into this high value chain. So what we need in agriculture is a strategy by which we allow for economic growth or allow for agricultural growth in the overall economy, and we are proactive in our inclusive policies. So we come up with things that can target farmers, and there's that issue of targeting already addressed, that they can be supported in such a way that they can take advantage of those opportunities that are occurring with rural transformation. And when governments are planning to move forward, what they need to make sure that they do is to have that broad strategy of growth, social protection, but also productive opportunities. Opportunities programs that allow agriculture to be part of the overall plan and agribusiness linked to it to be part of the overall plan. There's plenty of evidence that suggests from the World Bank and others that agriculture is more poverty reducing, and agricultural linked industries are more poverty reducing than other productive activities. This is largely because these are the activities of the poor. So if you target those, you can have a great benefit. So to conclude, we need to make sure that agriculture is part of the equation and that the government is making sure that it promotes that agriculture to ensure that you have inclusive rural transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Winters, for a very enlightening discussions. I think the message is very clear, yeah, that most of the poor in Indonesia and also the world live in rural areas. It means that in order to reduce poverty, we have to have a high agricultural growth. And in order to do that, we have to focus on improving profitability of agriculture activities. I hope there are in the audience here people from the Ministry of Agriculture, because I think this is a very important lesson. I think now in Indonesia, agriculture development is still based on the old idea, focusing on increasing production. We want to increase production of rice, want to increase production of maize, want to increase production of other commodities. But what Professor Winter has said to us that will not achieve high economic growth. And we have seen for the last few years that agricultural growth has been one of the lowest compared to other sectors in Indonesia. So I think we need to rethink about our strategy on agriculture development. Thank you, Professor. Now let's move to our last speaker, Governor Ridwan Kamil, who will share his experience in achieving inclusive economic growth in the city of Bandung and also his plan for the province of West Java, the second largest contributor to poor people in this country. Please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asrofil anbiya'i wa mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsan ila yaumil. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the government of West Java, I would like to share some of my experience, also plan to our biggest province in Indonesia. But before that, please be patient. I'll be speaking English with Sundanese accent. Okay, West Java is the biggest province in Indonesia in terms of population. It's also the closest province to the capital of Jakarta. Our productive age, mostly millennials, with 18 million productive workforce. 31% investment in national level happen to be in West Java. Next. In the next 5 years, I have 5 missions. The inclusive economic growth lies in the mission number 2, which is to create a human capital that very strong in product and also productive and competitive human resources. And also in the number 3, which is equity and also creating an inclusive growth in sustainable way. Next. The strategy for the next 5 years, based on the issues. Our issues in West Java, there is a big disparity between the north of West Java and the east and the south of West Java. The north part of West Java is relatively flat compared to the south of West Java, which is steep in terms of geological conditions. Urban and rural also become an issue. Many poverty rate very high in the rural areas, but surprisingly, Gini ratio in rural is lower than the urban. So the urban, there are less poverty but higher Gini ratio. In rural, they have more poverty but less gap. Yeah. I assuming because in rural you have more homogeneous economic activities. Also, as a governor, I have a political time, only 5 years, so I prepared 3 steps. The first 100 days, and the middle term is for 3 years, and also the 5 years progress. We will emphasize to have better infrastructure connecting to the most remote areas, price stability for commodity, maintaining purchasing power, more jobs opportunity, and also equalizing the basic needs in terms of health and education services. Next. In agriculture, for example, as Professor Winters mentioned, we would like to increase infrastructures and better irrigation. digitalize the sector. This is one of the revolution we will take in West Java in the next 5 years. Financial access to farmers, good warehouse and shippings, and also revitalize the use of land for agriculture sectors. Next, for examples, in West Java, we still have many unused lands because the lack of water resources. So we are next year starting to experiment what we call drip irrigation agriculture, where you can really farm in a dry land. Yeah, it's already successful in Israel, in China, in Thailand. So we would like to implement in the dry area in West Java. So you can grow anything with this technology, because basically the plant just need a drip of water to drink, not to be showered. So that's the basic principle. Next. This is also the big step we would like to engage, is to give the rural community a digital access. Yeah. We will start what we call digital village, Desa Digital, next month. We want to transform the life of rural people, not only having connection, but educating them how to commerce the product. So next year, my hope is the farmer can sell directly the goods, the foods, yeah, the rice directly to the people in Jakarta, for example. So the Jakarta people can order the rice from Indramayu online and directly sent by the courier to the homes of the people who orders. For example, in the current condition, the farmer in Indramayu who has 2 hectares of land, per year the income is only 3 million rupiah. Yeah, it's mostly like minimum wage. So imagine for the farmer who doesn't have the land. This is the 3 million is for the farmer who has 2 hectares of land. They sell the rice in the village for 4,000 rupiah, but sold in the market in Jakarta 12,000 rupiah. Who benefit the 8,000 rupiah is the tengkulak, the middleman, dan teman-teman. So by having the digital commerce for farmers, I'm very optimistic we can increase the welfare. The farmer can increase the sell price, and the buyer also can have a lower price. So the fair profit goes to the courier in between, the transporting the rice. Next. So for us, there are 5 principles to have inclusive economic growth that can reach the poorest side of the society, the vulnerable side of the society. Number 1 is to have them grow, yeah, in terms of the business, keeping the sustainable culture, make sure the village, the rural, keep the quality of environment as it is. Participatory now become the new spirit in West Java. Equitable process also to make sure the state, the country, the federal government and the provincial government also interfere and give access to all. And of course, the sense of confidence must be delivered to all stakeholders in a stable economy. Next. This is what we're about to do, yeah, infrastructure. But we have limited budget for all provinces, all cities in Indonesia. APBD or local budget comprise only 10% of the needs. So we have to find the 90%. If everything need to be financed by local budget, the progress will be very, very slow. That's why in infrastructure, in the 5 years, we would like to engage for PPP, public-private partnership. We would like to engage our local bank to give more credits also to city level to build more infrastructure. Number 2 is improving human resources. We will review the curriculum of vocational school, SMK, because it happens to contribute the most, the biggest number for unemployment is the graduate of vocational, lulusan SMK, pengangguran tertinggi. So we will review the curriculum to be more relevant to the economy, more digital, and also I will have a policy to ask the industry to create school. Nanti sekolahnya di pabrik, tidak hanya di sekolah. So the technology will be relevant because the current condition, the technology in vocational school is very old school technology, while in the factory they already very high tech robotic kind of thing. So we will try to fix this. Number 3 is integrations. More roads. West Java will revitalize 4 railways, building 3 more airports, also toll roads as part of the integration of the whole West Java. We will have project One Village, One Company to make sure the village people stays in the village but having an income at the same level in the urban areas. We're developing new economic centers based on the opportunities. So the next following slides will be the example, the action of the theory of inclusive, and this is already happening, some still planning. Number 1 is micro banking online. Kredit Melati, singkatan stand for melawan rentenir, because in my culture we would like to have some abbreviation. Kredit Mesra, Masjid Sejahtera, Kecamatan Antapani, antara cinta tapi doan ikan. So this is just to give a very easy memory. So this is no mortgage. The Credit Mesra is using the mosque because in West Java we have 100,000 mosques. So mine as well, we use the highest number of institutions to fight poverty. So people in the rural, instead going to the regular bank or trapped by the loan shark, they go to the mosque, asking the mosque committee to give the approval, maximum $40,000 US. Then the BJP, our provincial bank, will follow up the recommendation. So at the end of the process, my people will be more religious, but also that help because of this easiness to get credit. Next. Number 2, for example, as the minister said, we are focusing on Ummah in money. 3 years ago, I changed the way we pay zakat. Before, you pay very manual, you go to the office. But for urban people, it's very time consuming. So we changed paying zakat online. It increased 5 times. Before this online, in Bandung, for example, zakat per year only 3 miliar rupiah, 5 miliar rupiah maaf. So after the zakat online increased to 30 miliar rupiah, jadi naiknya 5-6 kali lipat. By changing the policy how the Muslim pays zakat, it increased 5 times. So this is an example. Then I can help the poor people more. I can give credit also. I can pay BPJS that can be cannot be paid by the government. So I think the more we use this Ummah finance system, I'm very optimistic. There is a different way of fighting the poverty. Next. This is already mentioned before. Next. Next month we will start the projects called One Village, One Company. The difference between the previous model is we will start with what the market wants. If the market wants a product that's very successful in fashion, in dairy or food product, then we fund the production in the poor villages. We will assist and we will mentor, and also the CEO for this company will be the graduate of universities. So I need 1,000 CEO for these projects. I need 1,000 graduates who can spend 2 years, 3 years in the village developing, connecting with digital marketing also. And I'm hoping this can really become the power of fighting the poverty in the village area. Next. This is also very important. we are already have a school for moms, yeah, for housewives, to give them a capacity building, not only to make the family always happy, but also increasing the income. The power of mama is very important, yeah, because once they have access to the economic knowledge, they can help the family income higher. Next. This is also an example, Pak Adit, regarding the basic access. Yeah. So we created what we call home medical, local language layan rawat, sambil melayan kita merawat. So it's a visiting doctors. They bring free medicine, they bring free services to the poorer side of the society. They just call 119, and the doctor will come treat you. This is to reduce the burden to BPJS, yeah. Because sometimes people go to the hospital for some simple disease that can be cured at home. So this will become the policy for the whole West Java in the next 5 years. As a governor, I will invest in infrastructure, in motors, in budget for the doctors and also the nurses. Next. This is also another issue to fight the extreme poverty, for the malnutrition atau gizi buruk. We have what we call food delivery. Yeah, food delivery. Again, the name is singkatan OMABA, bukan Obama. OMABA, Ojek Makanan Balita. So the moms in the PKK, they cook the healthy food and send by motorbikes to the poorer side. In Bandung, this project reduced the numbers of malnutrition to 0. So I will apply this concept of delivery to malnutrition villages using the motorbike the ojek. Next. Sebelumnya, you see the ojek driver is very strong and healthy.
Your policy will not get a political support. In my experience, Pak Asep, if I may share, Pak Ridwan Kamil is a politician, he knows better than I do. A bit difficult if you propose something, go beyond the political cycle. Because there is a tendency that maybe politicians, they are not interested in something go beyond 5 years. So when we propose something, we also need to create a success story that could be done less than 5 years. Because if something go beyond 5 years, then the next question is, why should I come up with a policy with this, my successor will take the benefit of it? So there should be a combination of the long-term policy, but also the sweetener. So that's the reason why, for example, like the fuel price adjustment, we provide the cash transfer, the conditional cash transfer at a time. That will be, probably the way to balance.
It's a large part of the economy. And by ignoring it, you're not taking advantage of it. The people are working hard, they're trying to get ahead, and you actually can do better in your economy if you allow it to thrive. And so one way to allow it to thrive is to provide finance. Another way is to allow it to slowly merge into the rest of the economy and to be legitimized. And so you definitely shouldn't ignore it. That's one of the problems, is a lot of countries just don't want to deal with it, and so they leave it there. So instead, you use it as part of an overall strategy and try to ultimately see that it will move towards more formalization over time.
Okay, clear. I get the message. So now let's go to Governor Ridwan Kamil. So the question is, you have many innovative programs, but many things, including the villages, microcredit and everything.